15% admin fee. Councilwoman Williams.
Yeah, I just want to make two notations. One, we're not even organized, and there's too many people calling, too many people at Prairie Veritas calling the apartment complex. We need to get ourselves together and get organized. All this calling these people, they'll tell you anything at some point because they're getting tired of talking to 3 and 4 and 5 different people. That needs to stop. If the mayor is going to be the person contacting them, then we need to make sure we have the mayor do and bring back to us what we want. Nobody else should be contacting them. Secondly, you're going to need to ask the question when they're here, because this Panther Hill has been here, I think 2 or 3 times. Cricket Field has been here. Instead of just letting them do a presentation and then we sit up here and don't ask them the same questions that we turn around 2 or 3 weeks later and ask the mayor, we need to ask them when they're here doing the presentation. We waste a lot of time.
We can't.
Instead of going to the source. Panther Hills was here.
It don't say discuss and consider.
Well, we need to put that on the agenda then, because Panther Hills were here. Those are the people we need to ask the questions to when they come here. Because we let them leave and then we're all over again.
The Bureau Veritas contract and our former city attorney told all of us here that these private developers are not required to report to us when they're in line with their zoning and the projects that they're doing. But what is necessary here is we have, and as Councilman Wallace stated, he's gone to them a few times, and they've shared with me that they feel like he's harassing them. So I'm just telling you, there's merit to what Councilwoman Williams says, but also if that's a councilmatic duty, I mean, they can do that, but what I'm saying is, if that's not a part of their function, they're coming into operations, that's what they're talking about. If they need a policy, the charter says they set the policy. They haven't set a policy, and they don't know what the current one is, but then they're upset because they think something isn't being followed. All I've told them is set the policy, and it'll be implemented. But the requiring someone to come who's not legally required to come is something that I nor they can do. There's just a lot of new interest in this project, and that's fine. But I would inure that the council take a look at the charter, look at councilmatic responsibilities for policy and other stuff, and do them instead of asking me what the policy is. Create what you want. Are we on the Bureau Veritas contract?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Councilman Jones.
That's why I asked before we went into this dialogue and conversation and personal opinions. Could we set a policy basically saying that if an outside, that we would prefer to use Via Veritas, but if an outside party is needed, that we have to receive documentations saying that Via Veritas can't come out because what we run into is convenience. So Panther Hill and the Cricket Field Company comes with this convenient for the mayor, but it doesn't say discuss, consider, and take action. Or it'll show from the previous agenda minutes that we asked for them to come and speak. Oh, but I forgot some language and all those things. So it becomes a convenient issue. So my question is saying basically, how do we go about?
Well, I mean,
is there a case that we can put a policy?
All policy is you're giving instructions to essentially the mayor in his capacity of acting as the chief executive officer for the city, because you don't have a manager or anybody else that does that. But you establish the rules in which he operates in that capacity. Okay. Not as mayor, but in his capacity as the permanent guy. Yes, absolutely you can.
Councilwoman Williams.
And I want to be mindful, it's unprofessional to laugh about that statement, because that statement was made to me by the contractors of Panther Hill, that they feel they're being harassed, as well as saying that if they'd have known that what they were going to have to go through in the city of Prairie, they never would have chosen the city to come here, because they have been treated so unprofessional and harassed on a daily basis. That was shared with me by the people who are building Panther Hills apartments. And to me, that's not something to laugh at, because it's very disrespectful and it's really sad for our city.
All right, so, we're not laughing, I just want to
Are we on
address.
Bureau Veritas contract, or we need to move the
All
agenda?
right, that's cool.
Okay.
I just want to address the fact in which we're not harassing them, but when our students go post on Twitter and all those different things upon how they would like to move out, and then we'll face infrastructure problems like we facing with Brookside. When Brookside came along,
We're
everyone
starting to
thought
get
it
a
was
little
good
bit off
idea.
topic.
I understand.
Okay.
But that's the issue in which we face today, which students run into a problem. So if we have to get certain information, then we elected by certain people to go out and make sure that we find that information.
Regarding the Bureau Veritas contract and the lack of inspections at Panther Hill particularly, the Sean G that we were talked about, that was posted, is the same Deshaun G that's Councilman Rowland's fraternity alpha brother, and posting incorrect things that have never been to that project. So that's just out there, but that's a part of the contract. They're
Mayor,
saying,
I know, but
Okay.
I can't sit there in good faith and tell Councilman Jones that we're
okay,
out.
good,
So,
we'll move
without
the
saying
agenda.
something.
Item 9,
I need the floor.
last thing.
This is a city council meeting, and I'm talking about the contract, the item, so. The contract is very nice. In this contract, have we decided, in reference to the contract, to have multiple, so if we have for fire services, a third party, can we, do we need to have a second contract if we're gonna use someone that is not identified in this contract to do this work? So if Bureau Veritas is doing plan review, or they're doing the fire inspection, and then we have another entity doing the fire inspection that we have not approved.
Yeah, here are two things. One, while you were out there, Councilman Jones did raise the issue of addressing this through establishing a policy on how the mayor actually invokes contractors for these types of plan reviews, permits, inspections, things like that. But yes, no, that's one aspect of it that I think will at least give him the direction and hold him also accountable for the things that you say he's supposed to do. But yes, if you're going to utilize somebody else, especially for something as serious as fire protection, I think it would be a good idea to have at least a short contract with that individual, establishing rates and identification clauses, yes.
But if that's come up and it did not get approved, and the mayor so moves to use go forward anyway, now what is that?
That's nothing, really. I mean, if y'all would sit there and say, we don't want you using, Mayor, you cannot use anybody else except Bureau Veritas in an emergency situation only, in which we'll call a special meeting and then bless it, you could do that.
Right.
You can do anything in between, but unless you said, no, we don't want you using this, and you just rejected the contract, I think if he decides, right now, there's some loosey-goosey policy when it comes to what authority he has in his capacity as the permit application.
Yes, he's used it in the emergency. Outside of emergency, he can use it one time for 30 days.
Well, all you have to do is establish that.
So you're talking about establishing the policy or establishing the contract?
Policy. I think it's a poor idea to put those kind of hamstring conditions in a contract. Number one, they're probably not going to go for it. Bureau Veritas doesn't want to be micromanaged, I can guarantee you. But they also are going to encourage y'all to come up with a very detailed policy that says, Mayor, this is how high you can jump. And this is when you have to come back to us and get additional permission. And that's your job as policymakers.
Okay. Item 9, discuss, consider, and take action on creation of a charter
We need
committee.
to, Mr. Mayor, we need to make a decision on are they updating the don't they have a current contract? When are we coming for contract review?
If you look at, on the first page, there's a section called term, I believe subsection 3. It essentially says that it's terminable at will with 30 days notice. So getting into the issues of cause and whether they met their burden of standard is really unnecessary to even go there. It creates a complete, you talk about ways of attorney's fees, well, that's a quick way to run up about a $40,000 bill. All you have to do is send them notice and say, hey, look, we'd like to huddle back up with you, consider this 30 days notice, and if you want to identify some other things within the scope of work, you just renegotiate a deal with them. But I don't think that that's the issue here. I really think the issue is just the instruction to the mayor on what he can and can't do.
Yes, sir.
Item 9.
Yeah, how does that come? How does that move?
I think you need, I feel like I'm beating a drum here, but It sounds like we got about 4 different action items that need to be on an upcoming agenda to establish written policy. That would be one of them, is, hey, Mayor, you're authorized to do this, and it really needs to be in writing, and preferably through a resolution, just so you can document it and the citizens can see what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Are we open for item 9 now?
Yes, sir.
Discuss, consider, and take action on creation of a charter committee to examine new recommendations for updates to the city's charter. Councilman Randall.
Yeah, I think that item kind of speaks for itself. I believe we've had one in the past, but I can't remember any recommendations coming forward. I don't remember how long they were actually formed, but I know the only way we can make amendments to the charter is through elections. And if those who remember when we passed the home rule charter, it was at the intention of making these amendments to where the charter more so fit the city of Prairie. And in the 4 years that we've been home rule, we haven't made any recommendations or adjustments. So I think it's time that we start developing a charter that accurately represents the city of Prairie.
You make that motion to create the
Mayor,
charter?
may I haven't had the benefit of seeing your charter, but do you have some, typically charters will have a provision in it for how the process for amending the charter. And really the election code should kind of mirror your state charter in that, or vice versa, that you're required to get a recommendation from a charter review committee, makes a recommendation to council. There's a whole process for that. And then you approve an ordinance establishing propositions. Is there anything in there?
No, we have so I will say that Olsen was the firm that helped us get to this process.
I can't believe they would do that.
And so I just wanted to put that out before you start to say anything that was.
Trash them out firm. I appreciate that.
So they were our firm, but we needed this because of some of the growth and development was happening. So instead of having the community go to civil war and having a charter that was very inclusive of different neighborhoods, we used a very basic.
I understand.
And maybe it is too basic. And so I think this is being on the agenda. This is for us to talk about establishing. This is the last time we had this conversation. I think the mayor at the time was on the committee and chaired the committee, and each of us gave recommendations. Each council person gave a recommendation of a person to be on that committee. I think council is the one who actually structures the committee, and so by this being on here, do you want to have this conversation at a later date, or is this something that we want to talk about now?
Well, this is simply the creation of the charter committee, and then they go back and
Yeah, I
decide
think
what its
what,
ramifications are.
I mean, this is a process, so I think establishing the committee, determine how many members you want, and then charge each one of you individually to come back with recommendations, and then establish their first meeting date, and then they go from there. But I don't have a problem with going ahead and creating the committee.
I would say seven or nine.
Seven is a great number.
Yeah, make the motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Randall?
I move that we create a charter committee to examine the new recommendations for updates for the city charter via, with including 7 members via an application, a general application process.
It's been properly moved and second that council create a new charter committee to examine new recommendations for updates to the city's charter. Is that it? Just want to make sure I get the motion correct.
I had one too.
With the application process, through an application process, you've heard the motion, ready for the questions. Councilman Randall?
My unreadiness is to have where council will bring a name up in that application process, meaning everyone who was on council selected a person to serve on the committee because everyone has different constituents that they serve. And if we go through the open process, we're not gonna get a cross-section of what needs to, outside of, and we have the 2 extra seats. So if we could make sure that every city council person got to have an appointment, a person selected that goes through the process, and then we'll have extra, so it won't be a majority of anybody, but it'll be a cross-section of the community.
Now, would that be a motion after this passes?
No, I
to do
just
it?
need, the motion needs to be amended to reflect that change in the process.
Okay,
I necessarily think that we should just go in the direction of allowing people to apply, because if they don't apply, then they're on a position that will be good for us to go to this.
So the issue that we came into, we didn't want to have when we first formulated this, it's not going to be about not having enough people to apply. So there was a charter committee prior to this that failed years ago, and you had, again, you're going to have different neighborhoods and different, it's just going to.
But it's just basically how we do it.
hold on, gentlemen, we have a motion on the floor.
He's trying to get, I'm trying to get him to accept his unwritten, because he has to get it, his second, he seconded, so he's asking the question if he
Does
wants to amend
does the
his
friendly amendment
motion.
need a second as well?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay, so the amendment is, go ahead.
All right, so basically what I'm saying is that, they go through an application process. We vet the applications out. They say basically, we'll agree upon this name, we'll agree upon this name, we'll agree upon this name, allow all 5 of us to make a decision.
But it becomes biased when, go ahead.
What he's saying is, the last time they did this, all the applications came from one demographic of the community. He said if we make recommendations, we can recommend people, and that means we can go have a conversation with them, we can recommend people from different, am I right, different sectors of the community. That way we can ensure that every demographic.
And if you want, in reference to yours, Councilman, everybody's application can still be reviewed by everybody,
Yes.
if that's what y'all want.
Yeah,
The companies do the same thing.
This happens to review, so we submit a name if we want, and plus allow others to fill out application, and then we can have a name.
Okay, you said that, Brother? Second. Okay.
Get all that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed have the same right? Ayes have it. So the second part, I think, just for clarity while we're here, is that every council member is going to submit one, and then public application process, but review all by council. Okay, you got that? I just want to make sure that motion's clear.
Can we go into executive session in reference to personnel matters? Does that allow us to do that?
No.
But listed, and the personnel has to be,
Yeah, I mean,
notice.
here, let me explain it this way, is, if personnel's put on there a specific way because we afford the person you're talking about certain rights, and they can exercise certain rights and have that discussion held in open session by law. So there's nothing on here that talks about it, so we couldn't talk about anybody.
So what we have on our agenda, is this untrue then? And on the bottom of our agenda, it says the city council reserve the right to adjourn into executive session at any time during the course of this meeting to discuss, and it lists the 5 sections, and it says personnel matters. So is that incorrect? Right.
Well, who do you have that works here? Then you could talk, here, the Attorney General has essentially said, depending on what kind of position you have to identify them. Like, you couldn't talk about the city secretary without putting city secretary on there. If it was a clerk or a part-time, somebody that was answering phones in the front, and you wanted to talk about them, fine. So if it,
I'll simply say, I wanted to find out if we had a police officer that was terminated, and what's the process? Do we have someone who's terminated or not? What's going on? So we don't know,
so you'd like the police chief to respond to y'all individually about a potential termination?
not individual. No, it's not individually. As a
What? No, so essentially, a police officer was terminated, you don't know whether he was terminated?
No, we don't know if he was. Well, in our budget meeting, he wasn't terminated, but supposedly he is terminated. So again,
Well, even more reason not to talk about it right now without posting it on there, especially if he was terminated, there's a potential wrongful termination claim.
We just,
It's just, my job is not black and white. I mean, I wish it was, it would keep my hair a little higher in the front.
so I mean,
Yeah.
so is this correct?
It could be interpreted correct if you want to talk about a clerk or somebody that's not considered an official, essential position. I don't think you could talk about a police officer that was terminated under that general description.
I mean, to get an update on like, hey, he was terminated, da-da-da-da, we couldn't go in executive session to get an update on that, to either he was or he wasn't.
You can ask that question right now. It's a recitation of fact. But my suggestion was, instead of airing this out here, is that I imagine if you approach the chief afterwards, he'll tell you. If not, we can put an action item on the agenda to talk about it.
Sounds good.
It sounds complicated, but this officer, I have to look out for that individual's rights.
And us, because if he doesn't have notice to bring it out here, that opportunity, then we could.
It could be a problem, so I prefer you did.
All right, no problem.
Councilman Jones?
I move that the verbiage in which we had for this emergency meeting that we couldn't have be on next agenda item. I mean, next city council meeting.
You want to talk about the general clause, the statement that he raised?
No, Panther Hill.
No, the Panther.
Oh, the Panther Hills?
So,
Okay.
we couldn't have it.
I misread you too.
I did too.
So we had the emergency meeting. We had a statement in which we asked for us to have the emergency meeting. We couldn't have the emergency meeting. So what I'm asking is that same verbiage be put on next meeting agenda the same way.
You want me to read the motion? I can read it. You want me to read the motion?
And
I'm just trying to figure out what the motion means.
You want to read it? Oh, the motion was topical.
That's the motion right there. You read that. Go ahead.
a motion to this not great. We asked for occupancy, inspections, building permits, and reports on any other related issues, Panther Hill apartment complex. But then I added that we asked for Via Veritas, like the people that provide the paperwork. So Via Veritas,
Ask for Panther Hill to come.
asked for Panther Hill to come, Fire Chief Bordeaux, and that's the key. That we.
So you want to add a future agenda item
Yeah. The next
to review all the materials that you mentioned, have them presented to you, and request that the representative from Panther Hills show up to answer questions, and anybody who, I heard fire chief
Fire
Yeah.
Chief.
Via Veritas.
Via Veritas.
and Prairie Veritas. Okay. Sure, you can make that motion.
You made the motion?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
You can clean that up later.
It's been
I've
properly
already
moved
got it.
and seconded.
I've already got it.
All those in favor say aye.
Who was my second? Sorry.
It's a,
Yeah.
so what classifies as an emergency meeting? Because to us, we seem to like have a misconception.
I know, and
So of someone being in jeopardy.
There has to be an immediate health and safety issue that if you don't address within 72 hours, that could lead to something really bad. It's usually reserved for natural disasters or imminent disasters. Dealing with inspection issues is probably somewhere in the gray area, unless there was an immediate fire hazard or something that y'all had to address. So,
It's been several.
hey, I recognize that. To me, it's kind of in a gray area. It'd be, especially in light of the fact that y'all have some issues still with this company, and I don't want you to put yourself in a position where you jeopardize your ability to enforce your legal rights down the road.
I would like to also move for us to possibly after special meeting I'm gonna ask a question. I'm sorry. LJ Engineering helped us come up with different contracts or recommendations, which they came up with when they looked for bids for us. Could this same company do bids for us, saying like when we wanted to do streets and things of that sort?
And they find us the clientele.
Yes, ma'am.
To do, when you say to do streets, are you talking major overhaul of streets, or what are you saying, repair streets?
To repair streets, to bring, I think, that we talked previously about that they have done this in the years where they laid off the pavement, some of the streets, grass came onto, it wasn't two-way streets.
Wasn't that a bond issue, Mr. Johnson? That was a major
That's
financing.
the engineering firm, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to save that for when we hire an actual engineer, and that's developing the scope.
We didn't have an engineer, so the reason why I'm asking, because I was gonna make this, since we're running out of time to spend our money, what I was gonna ask is that we have a special, that we go out, we ask LJA to find us bids on companies who can go out and do the work, which we looking for them to do, which is to update our streets and things of that such. Of course, we can't do as many streets and as much work as they did when they had the bond, but what we could do is start to put a plan in place to say over 5 years, all these streets will be fixed underneath this amount of budget.
Right. I get what you're saying. A couple months ago, we passed the formation, remember I put the motion to the formation of the street repair and a ditch maintenance schedule. And then shortly after that, our engineer resigned. I'm saying instead of, because the reality is to go through that process to get these contracts done for somebody in the streets, it's not gonna be done before September 31st.
I think that's fair.
You gotta have, X amount of time to
You can do a cursory, excuse me, you can do your own cursory review among you. You're not talking about a lot of money. If you just start bringing engineers, you're gonna spend a large amount there for an engineer.
And to update council, in case you haven't seen it, I mean, even from the repairs to the entrance to City Hall
Yeah.
and throughout the city, between where we could get someone to do it, pretty cheap, or the repairs throughout the city, we've had our guys spending that money doing it.
Right.
So at $1,000 a load for each asphalt, we've been doing repairs around the city.
I'm assuming here that we're under
New business.
So instead of having the discussion, if you would like to have that discussion at a future meeting, since that's what we're calling it, then we can. We can put a discussion item to talk about the pros and cons of starting that process you're talking about versus waiting to get an engineer, a recommendation from an engineer and everything in between, and flush that stuff out. Now's probably not the appropriate time.
And for the next agenda, I want to have on there, Ms. Hayes said she will have a travel policy.
Okay.
So if you can add it for the next agenda.
Councilman Hall?
I move that there'll be a presentation about the drainage issue that I mentioned earlier, presentation of the drainage issue within the city of Prairie for the next meeting.
And who's going to do that presentation?
Me and Mr. Glover.
Okay. Let's put that down for a presentation. Councilman Randall?
Oh, wait, second.
It may do this because I know there's been some misunderstanding about how and when things have to be placed. And I talked to you, Mr. Walsh, about, if you, a majority of council, want something to be on the agenda, then you essentially circumvent the mayor's authority to keep it off. So instead of just individually motioning for each one of these things, it sounds like the mayor's kind of going down, making note of this. At the very end, if you just want to make one motion to accept all of the recommended additions to the next agenda, that'll cover all of it.
Okay.
A presentation, me and Chief Solomon have been working on, for those who don't know, we're coming up on the anniversary of Officer Sobieski's death. He died on 2/9. So we're preparing a presentation for his family at the next city council meeting on the 24th, because the anniversary of his death is the 26th, I think, that Wednesday. So if we could get that presentation put on the agenda before we go over the
Yeah.
represent his family with some stuff.
Yeah, that's already set for agenda. We're having the flag and things. Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's a tragedy. Yes, sir.
I wanted to get a presentation to be done on the wastewater treatment facility design build for our next meeting to discuss, have a discussion.
Okay. Got that, too? Wastewater treatment plant.
And the second thing is I would like for us to establish a committee to celebrate the city of Prairie's 50th anniversary, which is in 2019. Many of us may know that the city is only will be 50 years old, which means it's why we're having these growing pains. And so I want to establish a committee that will work on year-long celebration, maybe designing a new logo, some things we can do to celebrate this 50th year, to celebrate our city. So I want to do a presentation on that at the next meeting.
Anything else?
I move that we accept all of the agenda items that were presented by council.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that all agenda items that were presented by council be accepted. You've heard the motion, ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Minutes.
Ah.